going to share my screen again. Then we're moving on to the next part of the meeting here, where what we do is we pick we're all about helping business owners to scale up, and one of the elements of ScaleUp Club is around the learning side of things. So we know that in order to scale up successfully, and it's not all about always going up and scaling up to different levels. You know, at times like this, a lot of us are certainly entrenching ourselves where we are. One or two of us may have had to take a step backwards, but either way, we've got to make sure that we've thought about these four pillars, if you like: the strategy, people, execution, and cash, and that we've thought those through for what it is that we're trying to do. So one or two of us mentioned planning. Mel was talking about 2021, but you know, thinking about really what it is that we need to do, just rather than being reactive. So what we try and do each month with ScaleUp Club, what we do is we pick from one of those pillars and we look at a particular tool or framework, something that we can think about whether it's applicable to our businesses and how to apply it, with the aim of moving the business forward, whether we're actually scaling up or entrenching ourselves a little bit more and making sure that we're more efficient and profitable at that particular step. Last month, we looked at cash flow forecasting and budgeting, and part of it was these 5 simple steps to forecasting and budgeting. I'm not going to labor the point on those. We looked at those last time, and if you want to find the information on that, then it's there in the ScaleUp Club membership page, which Caroline can let you know about later. This time around, what we're going to look at is the SWOT framework, and I'm sure everybody's heard of it, even if it's not something that you use regularly. And you know, I've got mixed views about the SWOT framework. And my personal view really is that it's a little bit theoretical. It tends to be something that often is done, you know, at a business school or something like that, or if you've been asked to produce a business plan or a marketing plan, they always want a SWOT analysis in it. And it's useful, but it's also got constraints around it, in that often we end up just spending more time about whether something's an internal thing and which box should it go in, and it ends up being completed and then probably put on just in the middle of a plan somewhere and put on a shelf. So but what I'm going to take you through this morning are a couple of tweaks on the SWOT analysis, which in my view make it much more useful for a couple of particular things that we might want to do. So the first is around helping us to assess our likelihood of success in converting an opportunity, an attractive opportunity. So it helps us to plan that out a little bit. And the second one is aimed at more leadership more brainstorming around strategic thinking and planning for the business. So so it might help one or two of you that were thinking about the planning aspects. So this is the traditional SWOT framework, but what I'm suggesting is something called the aligned SWOT. And Stu's going to take us through a little example of how he's done this actually along these lines in a few minutes. But the idea is that we actually start with the opportunity. It's a little bit harder to say. It's not such a great acronym, the OSWOT or whatever it is. But the idea is we start with the opportunity, and then we say, well, what are our strengths? You know, what do we like about the opportunity? What's good for us about the opportunity? What are our weaknesses for it? What are our threats? What are the risks to do with it? And Andy's going to talk about risks a little bit later. But that automatically leads us to thinking, what are we going to do about it? And that's the point. Instead of it just being 4 boxes, which are like, let's put things in boxes, and so what, this makes you think about so what. You just simply turn it around and add on the end the tactics, or so what are we going to do? What are we going to do about it? Now, that's making it very simple. You can, of course, if you're really trying to do this a little bit more detail, you can add all sorts of different columns along that to make it even more relevant. And I'm just going to throw something up now which might help along what I mean along those lines. But if we extend that and we add a few more columns, we've got some other things that we could do. Now, the idea of the first two, I'm not going to go into the detail of the Ansoff matrix and TVR score. We've covered that on previous ones, but essentially the Ansoff matrix, for those of you that don't know, is a way of quickly assessing the likely risk of failure for that based on whether you've got to go into new markets and new customer groups, or whether it's extensions and penetration. The TVR score is a scalability score about how teachable, valuable, or repeatable it is. But don't worry too much about that, because essentially what we're saying is if we've got an opportunity, which for a graphic design agency might be explainer videos, for example, who's the key target audience for that? So let's work out who the ideal client is, what's their key pains and needs, what's the key competition that we're likely to face within that, and then relative to the competition and for that opportunity, what are our relative strengths and our relative weaknesses, or pros and cons, and then what are the threats, and then what are the tactics to go with it. So it's not really that important necessarily as to what's in the columns, although this is what we would do. But the point is, as I said before, let's switch it around and start with the opportunity, and then we can map it out a little bit more and make things a bit more relative to that opportunity and to the likely competition that we're going to face. So that's that one. You'll need a pretty large whiteboard or magic white paper, whiteboard paper, or whatever to do that if you're going to do that. And then the second variation is something called the SWT framework. Now you might think, okay, well that's just taking out the O bit. It is a little bit different because the T becomes trends in it. And this is more of a strategic tool to do on a regular basis, certainly annually, ideally quarterly, and definitely at times of change. Because what we're doing here is we're saying, what are the trends that are going on around us that are relevant to us? So, it could be in technology. So it could be, this could be that there's increased trend. A simple one, more people working from home, working remotely. Okay, well, is that relevant to us? What other trends are going on within our sector? And then what are our strengths and weaknesses? So these are our core competencies or core weaknesses within the business. They're not transient things. They're things that generally we say, yeah, we're really good at these things, and we're honest enough to recognize we're generally not very good at these other things, because then we can say, okay, well, if that's a trend, do we have a strength that matches up with that trend? Because then the point is we are more likely to be able to win with that opportunity, with that trend that's going on. Whereas if it requires something that generally we're weak at, chances are, even if it's a big trend and it's looks like it's attractive to do something, if generally we're weaker than the likely competition in that, and we've got a big weakness, then we're probably not going to win at it. So why would we waste our time if we don't think we can sort that weakness out quickly, which by definition, if it's an inherent weakness, then we probably can't. So the SWT framework is just something that's a nice thing to do, particularly if you've got a senior leadership team, to do that on a quarterly basis, just tease out from each other what we think the likely trends are that we need to think about ahead of time. So Melanie was talking about, or Mel was talking about 2021, and a couple of other people talking about planning. Now, what are the trends that might impact our sector that are starting now, that might carry on and gather strength, and what are our strengths and our weaknesses that might or might not be relevant towards that. So there's a couple of tweaks on the SWOT analysis, which hopefully make them a little bit more useful. One is a more strategic tool, the SWT, and the other is a more tactical tool about working up a particular opportunity and working out how to unlock it. So the challenge for you, maybe in your breakouts, but certainly to think about, what we'd like is that you have a think about whether either one or both of those frameworks might help you in your business. So just have a think about it and see whether you think they might. So now what we're going to do is just move on quickly to Andy and then Stu, and they've got short presentation. As I say, Andy's going to talk about cyber insurance as one element of those trends or those risks that we might need to think about if we're doing our any variation of that SWOT analysis. So Andy, can I move across to you and hand over to you, please?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Kevin. Morning, everybody. Yes, so just to repeat, Andy Phillips from AP Insurance Brokers. Thinking about the threats from within the SWOT analysis, I wanted to focus today on a very specific and growing threat about cyber and cyber crime and cyber attacks. So I've I can't even say the word, enviable task of trying to make insurance interesting, but fortunately we've only got 5 minutes to do it, so it'll be a quick rattle through. I wanted to talk about why I feel it's important now, and what's available to you. Kevin, can you move on to the next slide? We've seen a huge increase in take-up of cyber insurance in the last year, from a range of different types of business. So I think it's definitely a growing trend. But why should it be important to businesses to consider? It is one of those threats. But first thing to bear in mind, it's not personal. Cyber criminals are not targeting XYZ Manufacturing Limited. They are carrying out mass attacks, whether that be through hacking or through phishing emails, blasting emails out to all and sundry, in that hope that 1 in 1,000 person is going to click on that link, which gives the criminal or the hacker the access to their systems. Hackers don't just target big businesses. They go for small and large. They're just looking for that weakness, and that can happen anywhere from a sole proprietor through to a big PLC. We'll all have seen those big names that have been the victims of attacks, whether it be the NHS or a big PLC like Vodafone and the like. And if you just think about how much those big firms must spend on their IT security, and those hackers are still getting in, you've got to think that for a smaller business like ours, we are vulnerable, because no matter how much you can spend, people will get through. And there is a common phrase in the market that says it's not a case of if you're going to get an attack, it's when you're going to get an attack. COVID obviously is a big thing at the moment, and I'm afraid the criminal fraternity is taking advantage of that. Insurers are seeing a big increase in attacks, people taking advantage of more business workers, more employees working from home, where perhaps the IT security controls aren't perhaps as great as they might be. People might be using their own devices rather than an office provided device. And that IT security might not be as great. With all the best will in the world of all the IT specialists that are out there, and indeed some of them on this call here today, it is that weakest link of the person that can let a hacker into your systems. Thanks, Kevin. Move on, please. So just very briefly, the things that you can insure against. There's lots of different levels of cover out there. There's everything from the freebie type insurance right the way through to very expensive covers. And it is a case of thinking about what can really impact your business. Don't get me wrong. There's some insurance is better than nothing. So if you feel constricted by a budget, then that's fine. But really think about what is going to impact your bottom line. What could really cripple your business? There's lots of different ways of going through insurance. I tend to look at three main headings: the things that can affect your own business, so your own costs, the damage. Now that can be things like physical damage to your data and your IT if someone gets into your system. It can be if you suffer a data breach, it's those notification costs. So if you have to contact the Information Commissioner to say you've had a data breach, you then have to write to all the people that might have been affected, all your data subjects. That can be a really expensive process. You can look at the data forensic costs. So someone's attacked your system. You need to find out how far they've got, what have they got access to, and that can be a very, very costly process, getting data forensics experts in to assess that for you. And insurers will cover that and indeed put their own specialists on your system to help with that. There's a whole other things on the own cost side of things. If your system gets hacked and you can't use it for a week or 2 weeks, what about your loss of income? That's a big potential loss for any company, particularly if you're involved in online sales. If you rely on your website to sell products or sell services or get meetings, then you've got no system. Your income is cut off at the knees. Secondly, the third-party costs, so the costs that you're liable to others. So someone gets into your system and somehow they get they can spread viruses to your clients, your customers. They somehow force a breach of privacy within their systems as well. So their clients have had a data breach. That all can come back to you if you're shown to be the firm or the business that's been the root cause of that data loss. And then finally, just very quickly, and it's something that's often forgotten because people talk about cyber insurance and they think about the data breach and the damage to systems and that sort of thing. But it's the cyber crime, which is often the bigger part of and a growing part of claims costs now. So that's anything from funds transfer, so someone getting into your system. Stu was talking earlier in our little group about a company who'd had their Amazon account compromised, and from what I understand, money was transferred very slowly over a period of time to the criminals. So that can happen. You can have theft of personal funds. Someone gets into your system and somehow gets access to the director's personal accounts. You could have the thing you often hear about was extortion and denial of service attacks. So someone gets onto your system and takes down your website. Again, if you're reliant on your website to sell product, then that is going to be an immediate cut off of your income. You need to be able to rely on an insurer that will get access to your systems quickly, identify what the problem is, and call and solve the problem. And things like telephone hacking, push payment fraud, corporate identity theft, so someone getting into your system and masquerading as you. So that's a very, very quick run through, and I'm guessing I'm probably on my 5 minutes. So any questions on that, please don't hesitate getting get in touch either by email or by telephone.
Yeah, or thank you, Andy, or in the chat room. You know, in the chat room here, if you've got particular questions for Andy, Andy can answer those then in the chat. Brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now so that Stu can share his, and I'd like to introduce Stu Avis, from Audacious Creative, but the manifesto man, as I think he's becoming known now. So
yes, absolutely. Well, thank you very much indeed. Let me just share my screen. So there we go. So yeah, so I'm Stu Avis. I run a creative design company called Audacious Creative. Traditionally, for the last 10 years or so, I have been just a kind of freelance graphic designer. But 4 weeks ago, we launched the Nexus program, which is a way to help businesses communicate the things that make them genuinely different and stand out from anyone else that does the same thing. It changes the conversation from what they do to why they do it and the values. It embeds those values across the brand, across the messaging, and actually then creating authentic culture within the business. So actually working with the teams to actually embody those behaviors that actually are fundamentally driven by the values. And we conceived, created and launched that in 90 days. So we completely pivoted the whole kind of business model. So obviously that was a huge kind of deal for us as a company. So what were the things that have kind of been really challenging and the things we need to be aware of? So this is a very traditional SWOT analysis in one way. So obviously we've seen strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And then I just kind of wanted to put a little definition in there for my own remembering when I was writing it. So obviously you've got the internal factors, things that I can control, and then the external factors, things that I can't control, and either are going to be an opportunity for me to use or exploit, or actually something that's actually going to potentially damage and harm the plans I've got to grow the business. So what are the strengths? So our manifesto, it's a document that helps businesses communicate in a very particular way. It's something that no one else is doing. For us, we've used it, we've seen our businesses kind of go through the roof as a result, and we're doing it for others because it's a different way of communicating. One of the strengths is obviously me and my approach. I've been doing this for 10 years. We've got a strong local brand. People buy into me rather than from me, which is a really important thing. And there's the understanding that I have to need to shift the conversation from what and product and service through to why, who we are. Because we're a very small company, we've got the ability to be flexible and adapt very quickly as you know, we took 90 days to kind of pivot the whole business, and then actually willingness to drive, to push it into new areas and new thinking. So that it's interesting actually that some of the strengths are also some of the weaknesses. Actually, because it is just me generating the business, there's only so many hours in a day I can do to actually do the because obviously got to run the business, do the marketing, etc. There's only so much, you know, in terms of my mindset, my limitations. There's new programs, so not many people know about Nexus yet, because you've only been launched kind of 4 or 5 weeks. People know me as a traditional freelance graphic designer, so it's changing the conversation, changing the perception. Looking at actually, you know, some people, because of COVID particularly, it's a new program. Do people kind of want to be the first to kind of take that risk with something that's new? And I don't have a big budget for marketing. So I need to think about how I can market effectively and efficiently. So what are the opportunities? Well, I'm going to put the opportunities and threats together, because actually they are very much intrinsically linked. So COVID-19, this whole pandemic that we've been experiencing now, and has been an opportunity and is a threat. So as a business owner, I've had a lot of time to reflect and work on their business, and others have too. And people are open to new ways of doing things, from online networking through to new business approaches, through to a whole range of new ways of doing things, new thinking. Some business owners are more willing to take a risk to get that competitive advantage, and people are understanding in the conversations I'm having that core values and business culture are more important and so much more on the radar than they ever have been before. But again, when you're the flip side of that coin is that actually some business owners have become very risk averse, and rightly so, because of just the threats that this has presented to them. So businesses have become locked down and not willing to spend money until things become much more stable, as a more certain future. For me, a big threat is another full lockdown. Hope we don't go there. And actually looking at actually what that impact might have on businesses. There's uncertainty about the future, and actually what is the business landscape going to look like? What is the new normal once we are out of this? What's that going to look like? So they're all good and they're fine, and you know, that's kind of in theory. So what are my so what's? So I'm aware time is of the essence. I'm going to get on. So for me, a strength for my so what for my strengths are actually I want to grow my network. I want to develop a very powerful referral partner network. I want to hopefully over the next year bring on 12 quality referral partners. I want to keep it small. I want to keep it lean, and I want to keep it sharp. I want to keep the main thing, and not get sidetracked. I'm a bit of a magpie. Oh, shiny thing over here. So I need to kind of focus on that. So the so what for the weaknesses actually, because it's just me, what can I outsource? To take some of that pressure off, but then there's that time money thing, therefore I need to manage the cash flow and all of that. And how can I demonstrate the value to program when it's so new? And then actually who can I build around me to help me and support me and guide me? And that's for me one of the ways that Smart 90 and the Select program is so powerful and a great opportunity for me. And then in terms of the opportunities, it's actually want to be talking to the right kind of people who are actually looking to who are reflecting and looking at new ways of doing things, a new approach, new ways of communicating. But I don't need to rush it. This is a plan for the next 10 years. So it's doing things right, taking it time, building it slowly but steadily, and making sure that all the boxes are ticked. And then actually, but in terms of the threats, actually being more efficient with my time when networking and marketing, but to not get too settled in kind of one way of doing things, one mindset. Just because it's the way I'm doing it now doesn't mean I need to be doing it if it's right doing it maybe a year's time, 6 months time, or 5 years time. So that's just a really quick way of kind of blitzing through my SWOT analysis, and I hope that helps.
That's super, Stu. Thank you very much for that. So really good example there of how Stu has adapted the general SWOT framework to then include the so what's, and I think that's that's a really key thing there with the SWOT. Whatever way you do it, make sure that you do end up with the so what.